Hello, I'm Stephan Schwartz, and I'd like to welcome you to the Schwartz Report. This week, I want to talk about 5 trends which are shaping the Earth. They're not getting the kind of attention they should, which is why I want to do this. And these are not just things which are affecting politics, although they are that, or sometimes they're not even being paid any attention to, but they are literally shaping the earth. So let me start. Water, food, melting, ocean currents, and sea rise. Let me start with water. Most of us know very little about water except that it comes in 2 types, salt and fresh. Water covers over 70% of the Earth's surface, and 97% of it is salt water. 2% is frozen into glaciers and ice caps, that's shrinking, and only about 1% is drinkable, and half of that comes from below the Earth's surface. So just so you understand, water, as you may remember from school, is 2 hydrogen and 1 oxygen atoms, and it's written as H2O. Up to 60% of your body, the human body, is water. The brain is 70% water, and the lungs are nearly 90% water. Lean muscle tissue contains about 75% water by weight, as does the brain. Body fat contains 10% water, bone is 22% water. About 83% of our blood is water. And each day, humans must replace about 2.4 liters of water, some through drinking and the rest taken by the body from the foods that you eat. So as you can see, your life and your health, and indeed the health and life of entire societies, is very tied to water. Now, for most Americans, access to water in the past has been a given, sort of like the right to vote or some kind of birthright. And when you turn on a tap, do you ask whether you can drink the water that comes out? Probably not, unless you live in a growing number of cities, because water is becoming a major issue in the United States, because we don't keep up the infrastructure very well. And a lot of cities have lead pipes, or they don't have proper purification. So water is becoming a significant issue in the United States. And that's true all over the world. You may be surprised, for instance, to discover half the people in the world today lack the sanitation levels that Romans enjoyed over 2,000 years ago. That's a picture of a Roman public toilet, by the way. Half the hospital beds on Earth are occupied by people with easily preventable waterborne diseases. In the past decade, more children have died from diarrhea than all the people killed in all the armed conflicts since World War II. And that sadly even includes the thousands of children killed in the Gaza war or the Ukrainian war. This is a big deal, this issue about water, and it doesn't get described properly. access to water would save about 2 million lives a year. If the people of the world just had access to clean water, drinkable, potable water, about 2 million lives a year would be saved. Most of the great civilizations in the long path of human history have been built along rivers or lakes or oceans. This is a picture of Alexandria, Egypt, where I found Cleopatra's palace and Mark Antony's palace and the lighthouse of Pharos, one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world. And they're all under the water that you see in that picture in the eastern harbor of Alexandria, Egypt. But that's a story for another day. Second, food. Now, you think about food every day, of course, as does everybody else. It takes 2 million pounds of water to produce 2,000 pounds of grain. So you see another reason why water is so important, because it has an enormous effect on agriculture. And this really, let me give you a sense of this. It takes 15 million pounds of water to grow 2,000 pounds of cow. So the next time you eat a hamburger, realize how much water it took to grow that animal. Maybe you should stop eating mammals. It takes 10,400 pounds of water, about 1,300 gallons, to produce that 8-ounce hamburger that you got at the fast food place. Maybe it wasn't even 8 ounces. 2/3 of water usage is in agriculture. And by 2020, the world will be short, or was short, 17% of the water needed to feed the population. Genetically modified organisms, GMOs, are changing the face of world agriculture in what many experts believe are negative ways. So it isn't just water that's a problem in agriculture and in food. It's also because agriculture, food, is being turned into a corporate profit operation. One international corporation, Monsanto, controls 90% of this growing market. One particularly pernicious linkage is GMO corn and corn ethanol. This maximizes the use of petroleum-based pesticides and fertilizers, and it pits corn for food against corn for fuel. So the whole structure of agriculture is one of these trends that is shaping the earth. We're hardly talking about it. Over the past decade in India, 200,000 farmers have killed themselves. Every suicide can be linked to Monsanto, says cotton expert Vedanta Shiva, claiming that the biotech firm's modified Bt cotton caused crop failure and poverty because it needed to be used with pesticides and fertilizers. And King Charles has made the same accusation. India's Assam tea district has seen a precipitous drop in production. Tea research centers blame climate change for Assam's shortfall because the region's temperatures have risen 2 degrees Celsius, 3.6 degrees Fahrenheit, over the last 8 decades. And that has another effect, melting. When you hear anybody talking about melting, but this is a huge deal. Antarctica has lost much more ice to the sea than it gained from snowfall, and that has resulted in an increase in sea levels. And I'll get to that in a minute. But let me just stay focused on melting. So as the polar regions are melting, the sea levels are rising. And let me show you how precipitous this is. Here is the Larsen ice shelf in Antarctica between June 31st and April 13th in 2002. Look at that. It disappeared. It melted. And it changed the whole nature of the Antarctic. Greenland has lost so much ice, it's now known to be not one, but 3 islands. And between 2003 and 2005, that was years ago, Greenland's coast shed 155 gigatons, 41 cubic miles of ice per year, while the snow accumulation of the interior of the ice sheet was only 54 gigatons. The amount of ice lost in 2 years is roughly the same as the amount of water that flows through the Colorado River in 12 years. So this melting issue is becoming a huge, huge effect on the earth. We are doing this, humanity, because of the technologies that we are using. And we're not talking about it. When did you hear a politician talk about what's happening in Greenland or in the Larsen ice shelf or Antarctica? Oh, there may be a few of them, a few Democrats that mention it, but there's a significant number of Republicans who don't even believe climate change is real, and let alone the details that make up climate change. Because we say the words climate change, we don't really think about what those words mean. Global warming, for instance, is shrinking the glaciers on the Tibetan side of Mount Everest faster than projected, putting 2.5 billion people at risk for lack of water supplies. 2.5 billion people. Now, what do you think is going to happen? They're going to become migrants. We have now about 117 million people presently as climate change migrants as a result particularly of sea rise and this melting. So it's having a huge effect on human populations, and it's going to get much worse. Look at Glacier National Park in Montana. I can't even pronounce this word. The Illecillewaet Glacier, the Great Glacier. This is a picture of it in 1898. 1898, that's it. Look at it in 2006. It's almost gone. And in 2024, it is almost completely gone. All of this is changing the environment in these areas. Now let me talk about something that I almost never hear anybody talk about. and that's ocean currents. This is a map of what's called the Atlantic Meridional Overturning Current. That involves the Gulf Stream, and it's the major Atlantic ocean current. And it's breaking down. It's globally important because where the surface water moves northward as part of the Gulf Stream and transports warm water towards the Atlantic, then it cools and sinks to return southward as a deep ocean current. And the collapse of the AMOC, that's what science calls it, would have a devastating effect on climate in Europe. Not warming, surprisingly enough, as you might think, but temperatures in the UK and Scandinavia could drop 9 to 27 degrees Fahrenheit in a matter of decades. Now, what do you think that would do to all the agriculture in those countries? What do you think that plus the sea rise would do in terms of migration? We're going to have hundreds of millions of people displaced by the changes of these trends that I am describing to you. Let me look at sea rise. And I'm just going to pick one little piece of it because it's going on all over the world. But I just want to look at the Chesapeake Bay because I grew up in Virginia and on the Chesapeake Bay. So it was a huge deal when I was a boy. And it's a huge deal to all those towns and cities along the East Coast. So here's a 1 meter sea rise. And look at what that's doing. Here's 2 meters. And you can see that whole sections of the East Coast are going to become uninhabitable because they're going to go underwater. And again, this is just the Chesapeake Bay. Here's 3 meters. Look at the eastern shore. Look at what's happening in Maryland. Look at Virginia. Something like 30% of the city of Norfolk and Virginia Beach may go underwater. The largest populated area in the state, except for up toward Washington. So we're going to have huge problems, coastal real estate, collapse of real estate. You can already see this starting in Florida, where insurance companies won't insure you anymore if you have a coastal property. Here's 4 meters sea rise. It's going to be a very, very different country with all of these coastal areas in deep transition. 5 meters. You can see this. Go back and look at it again. We're talking about 6 meters. This kind of change is going to be a transformation in the earth. The breakdown of sea currents, the loss of agricultural land. You can see in California, for instance, or where the Colorado River is drying up, or the Mississippi River, and all those towns and cities along the Mississippi, or Colorado, river, 7 states require that water to really exist in the way they do. And that's all changing. So these 5 trends that I've talked about that are altering the earth Water, food, melting, ocean currents, sea rise. Start paying close attention. If you live along a coastal area, do a Google on what the sea rise is going to look like in the future. Go to Google Scholar and do a search. I mean, I can tell you that the house that I grew up in, which was built originally in 1653 on a land grant that was given to my mother's family by Queen Elizabeth I, it's probably going to disappear. And so are large parts of Gloucester, Virginia, which is where I grew up. We are going to see massive change and massive disruption of people and where they live. This is occurring very quickly. Look at what's happening in Florida. Look at what's happening in terms of fires in California. These 5 trends that I'm talking about are changing our world. And if we don't do anything about it, and we don't get serious about it, and our people we elect to office don't get serious about it, the world of our children and our grandchildren is going to be very, very different. It's up to us. When you vote in November, you better vote for people who care about these trends. And I'm sorry to say it sounds very partisan, but that's not how I mean it. You have to vote Democratic because the Republicans just don't care. And whether they care or they don't care, it's happening. It's going to change your life, my life, the lives of our children, our grandchildren. We have a very short time before these things occur. If we don't start doing things to correct these problems, they're going to alter our lives forever. Thank you.